you feel about censorship and how do you feel about comedy? That is a question I want you to ask, because MSNBC is calling for comedians to censor themselves. They have some handy rules that they've provided for us, being the good people, the honest people at MSNBC that they are, that they're saying we should implement for the sake of everybody else, right? So let's go through these rules first and foremost. The big part of this they talk about cancel culture and how they don't think cancel culture is real. But as we know, that if you're a part of the establishment, like MSNBC is, it's not that cancel culture isn't real. It's that you literally have no unique opinions that are risky enough to get you in trouble. Right? Like, they reference Sarah Silverman here, and they even point out, like, she got in trouble, for her blackface joke like 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But here are some of the rules that they've put into place for you to follow. It says, first, your observational humor must slay. Well, they lose credit right away for using slay in a sentence as adults. On this score, I commend her reflection, they're talking about Sarah Silverman, on the fragility of testicles, whose reputation for manly toughness she opines in as undeserved. I applaud her confession. That is my biggest fear in getting dementia, she says. She says her biggest fear, this is Sarah Silverman, and her biggest fear is masturbating in public, because that's very edgy humor, I guess. They also say that you can always punch up, but you should never punch down. Those are rules 3 and 4. So what's the funniest about this is what they list as the groups you can punch up on, which are Nazis, Hitler, and the Christian right.
No, Nazis are not stronger and more powerful than you. There's no punching up on Nazis. Nazis are below you. You also punch down against Nazis.
It's cool to single out one religion that you can punch on.
You're only allowed,
crazy to me.
You're only allowed to insult one religion. That's
punching up is about insulting those in power, not about those you hate. Yep. What the hell?
I mean, they're saying at least the Christian right is in power.
Yeah. There is also
one of the funniest simultaneously
delusions.
It's a fringe movement.
It's one of the funniest delusions of Twitter and the mainstream media, where they live under this specter of the Christian right as if it's this big authoritative group in America these days. We know that that's not the truth.
Also, the best part of comedy is the rules. I've always thought that. The more regulation you have, the better the comedy.
There's nothing I like more than going up to do a comedy routine and thinking, what can't I say today? And they say don't punch down. And fourth, punch yourself and your group in the face. There's Jewish. They basically saying, like, you can insult yourself. It's the same concept as stay in your own lane. You're allowed to insult yourself. That makes sense to me. I have no problem with self-deprecating humor. You're allowed to make fun of people in your group. So this is why Hollywood loves this. You know why? Because they love insulting white people, because it's white people that just are constantly self-flagellating all the time in Hollywood, which is a big part of their business model, which is white people. Am I right? Here's the thing. You should be able to make fun of them. But the problem arises when you're allowed to make fun of one group, but not another.
It's just boring. You know what I mean? Like, it's obviously slanted to be okay to attack certain people and only certain types of ethnicities or cultures. And on top of that, like, everyone ends up saying the same thing because no one's allowed to move outside the box.
They talk about, they're talking about her rules here in Sarah Silverman. They say free speech purists and libertarians might respond to this 5-step program by fulminating voluntary censorship. Slippery slope. Isn't art about liberty, man? I love even their snarky comments make me want to drop kick. If I could drop kick a newspaper or a news network, I would drop kick MSNBC or any of these places because they're annoying. Not the people. If I could drop kick a sign of MSNBC, I would. It says, but man, perhaps comedians ought to temporarily ease off the unnuanced and even Sarah Silverman's more nuanced punch down shtick. So they're saying they're pulling the ladder up behind them, saying they were allowed to do it beforehand. She's made her money now. Now she's Sarah Silverman. She's big, famous. She's got all of her corporate backing. But now you can't make those same jokes because of some vague notion of what? The greater good, I guess?
Who even knows?
Like, it kind of makes me sad to think that that's where this media has gone. And it proves why it's so inauthentic, because there was a time. You could make an argument in the 90s, in the 2000s, when Hollywood was subversive because there was more of a Christian morality to society at that time. Whether we're talking when Harry Potter was being, taken out of schools, it was being requested to be removed from schools because of witchcraft. There was a time when Hollywood was what was hip, what pushed back on the majority of the country, but that's not the case anymore. They are the all-encompassing shtick of like weird moralism. They just moralize in a different way. Like now it's just, you have to obey us because of, I guess, pride and because of inclusion, right? You're not allowed to be you're not allowed to disclude anyone anymore unless you're, I guess, a white Christian conservative, right? Thoughts?
It's stupid. It's boring. It's unsurprising that the rules for censorship are coming from MSNBC. It's unsurprising that MSNBC is specifically against Christian nationalists, I guess. Like, I don't. Also, why are they regulating comedy? I thought you were a news channel. I don't really get any of this. It's also like, oh, this mega corporation that has a clear bias is acting on that bias. And you're like, oh, cool. I thought this was the case. Makes sense. I've never really been into Sarah Silverman. I know she was kind of a powerhouse in her day. I've never really followed her stuff. So that's sort of neutral to me. I don't know if you have any feelings about this.
Personally, I like Sarah a lot. I didn't know her. I don't know her. I haven't hung out with her or anything. Back in like 2007, I appreciated that.
How
she
do
was
you
kind of
feel
vocal
about
the
rules
war.
in comedy?
The internet age has changed a lot of the dynamics of humanity. Like the ability for people to drum up a crowd, a mob, and then harass a human overnight now didn't exist 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So people are scrambling to try and prevent mob control, and some of the ways they're doing this to try and make rules about what you can and can't say, and that's like, but I think that kind of stuff upsets people if they're told I can't form a mob. Like that's my right in the United States is to form groups. We're allowed to group up and come together in public, and if you want to call it a mob, you can call it a mob, but like as long as we're not violent, we have the right to come together. And so the censorship stuff is kind of preventing that and causing people to go underground and then group up underground, and then that can get much more dangerous.
Far more dangerous. Also, having all the ideas out there is the best way to dispel bad ideas is to be able to push back against it. And comedy oftentimes is used as a way of speaking truth to power in a way that regular people can't do. Like Ryan Long does great comedy that ends up having a lot, like do you remember when he did Woke Racist and they're like the same person? That was a fantastic commentary on the culture that we were living in that was done in a humorous way that's able to push back in a way that if he had done that in a way that wasn't comedy, he would have put people, their shackles would have been put up.
It was so brilliant. Like it was him and Danny. Danny was the woke, and then Ryan was the racist, and Danny would be like, he's all the woke guy. He's like, I think that black people should have their own bathrooms and have their own, and then Ryan, the racist, is like,
yes.
oh yeah, they should definitely be split up and we should definitely be segregated and have our own space. It was like, oh my God, that's so brilliant.
Like showing horseshoe theory, like how horseshoe theory works in a way that can allow multiple people, maybe from different belief systems, to come together and realize that we live in absurd times, and it's through comedy that's possible. But if we were operating under Sarah Silverman's rules, he wouldn't have been allowed to do that because the commentary he was doing would have been punching down.
So these are Sarah's rules.
I think
that
it's weird.
MSNBC's
Like
making a story about.
We have a Democratic president in office, but that would be punching down if you were to comment on left-leaning progressive people. Like,
can't do it.
I thought you guys were sort of you have one chamber and you have the presidency, so you guys are sort of a dominant force, I would say.
Also, it's hilarious because all celebrities should be fair game just by economics alone, because if their position in society means that they're going to be, that it would always be punching up on them. But now you're not allowed to criticize celebrities either, because of vague characteristics and inclusion, and because celebrities get mad when you call them names and have to go. Did you see the thing where apparently on the Rings of Power set they had a therapist because of racist backlash, which is insane. They got them a therapist on set because people said mean things about them on the internet. You're telling me that
They should have just confiscated all their phones and kept them off social media.
I personally don't like insulting people as comedy. It's easy and it's dirty, and I don't feel good about myself when I do it, and it makes the group peer pressure, and now you're the stupid one because everyone's laughing at you. I don't like doing that to people. It happened to me when I was a kid. I don't like it, but I don't want to be told that I can't. I just had to come to that understanding on my own that it's not the best way to make people laugh.
Right. And commentate, with this Ryan Long sketch, pointing out sort of the hypocrisy in what you're doing, not like insulting you in some sort of stupid way. Like, he's not saying, oh, progressives are all ugly. He's pointing out that like some of the things they say actually align with these people that they say they hate. And that's interesting, right? That makes you think, and hopefully would make them think about their actions.
It also proves how disingenuous the article is, because they would label that as unnuanced when it's actually very nuanced commentary on what you're doing. Like, I really do think that the future of comedy, it ends up being something like what Joe Rogan is doing, where he has to start his own establishment. And do that, and a lot of people are
just don't go on MSNBC.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
And
Leave that one behind.
People are doing their own thing. Remember, Andrew Schultz had to buy back the rights to his comedy, his live comedy bit that he did, because they didn't want to air certain jokes, and he's like, "I'm not letting you cut my piece out there. Like, that's my work. I want my work to remain whole." And what I found is that if you believe in what you're doing, and you refuse to be censored, and you put in the work that allows that to happen, meaning it's going to be harder, you're not going to have all the backing that comes from having one of these companies, put the material out for you. People will come and support you. Mm-hmm. People will show up for your work if you're good at what you do and you're authentic. But they don't want authenticity. What they want is people to conform among this amorphous blob that is what we would call the mainstream media now. And that just leads to a bunch of boring content that's all the same. All the humor that they talk about with Sarah Silverman that's basically okay is all basically toilet humor and shock humor that's not funny. Like, at least in my opinion, isn't funny. Like, I don't find that entertaining. But even if somebody does find that entertaining, why should they be the only ones who are allowed to have humor that they like? Why shouldn't everyone be allowed to have their own types of humor? Oh, and we've got a $20 one from Tony Guevara. Says, re, like that. Okay. I don't know if I got all the O's there.
I don't think there was enough enthusiasm there.
All the E's there, but okay, how would you do it?
I'm not going to do it. It's your show. I'm not going
to. Yeah, it's more about the E, like, like the R is almost like in the background.
That was perfect. I don't know, man. Like, I also am annoyed at seeing multinational corporations talk about the right type of censorship as if that's a thing.
Well, censorship, that is, like, I worked as a social media administrator censoring content. And what you learn is that the censor is the person that is just looking to see if it's okay. If you allow content to exist, you're still censoring it as the censor, but your censorship is this can be. So just that there is a censor on board. So not all censorship is bad. Like, if someone posts child porn, the censor will say, hey, that can't go up. It was censored and it was righteous, you could argue. And censorship doesn't always mean taking something down, basically. It just means that there is someone observing and deciding whether it can be up or not.
Yeah.
It doesn't always, you don't always need to have a censor in place, but sometimes things get really bad really fast if you don't.
We'd love to live in a world where no one felt the need to make, consume, or post child porn. And therefore we wouldn't need one person to say, hey, wait, don't put that up. Yeah. We would love it if you had the personal wherewithal to not do that, because in my opinion, and I think everyone's opinion, it's awful.
But that's a crime. We're talking about art.
I think having centralized...
They're saying you're bordering on like hateful speech, which what does that remind you of? Hate speech, which is a crime.
Centralizing the censorship is dangerous.
Hate speech is a crime. What do you mean a crime?
You can be
by law?
In
America?
Countries.
Yeah, you can be convicted of hate speech.
In America?
Yeah, of hate crimes.
Of hate speech on the internet?
That's what a hate crime is.
Like, okay.
If I said something hateful and it violated...
How does free speech not cover that?
Because we have given up free speech as a country.
Are you sure it's a crime? I'm reading about it.
Is there strong precedent of like actual prosecution? I mean, I know this has happened in the UK.
I have known someone to be convicted of being, well, this is in person, it's not the internet, of using a racial slur towards someone and being convicted of hate crime.
Okay, so it happened in even then.
Then it would still extend. There's
insane.
no reason to believe it wouldn't apply to the internet.
That's insane.
Bet you can find a specific case. My example is in person. Obviously, you shouldn't use racial slurs. On the other hand, like, that is censoring free speech, but we do it.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I tend to like hate speech. I like that. I like that you're.
We can regulate it.
I like that it's legal to tell someone that you hate them. I think that is a core tenet of the United States, that you can express that. If you're not allowed to express your hate, it just comes out as violence.
Sure.
So you have to be able to vocalize that stuff to get past it peacefully.
Yeah, and we aren't. I don't want anyone to be. I don't know that I would be comfortable having a central censor like you're saying, who is saying, well, you're not allowed to express these ideas or thoughts, even if they're awful and I don't like them. right? If they're awful and everyone hates them, they will die on their own.
And then it becomes some subjective idea of what another person who has lived an entirely different life from you, an entirely different life from the person who you're supposedly being accused of committing this hate crime against for saying something, and you have some subjective definition of what that means.
Right.
Like, I have a problem with that.
Well, and like, think about the ACLU. For a long time, the ACLU used to have this reputation for defending Nazis because they said terrible things, but the ACLU was like, you have the right to say it. That is free speech. The ACLU has shifted and takes on much more progressive cases in these day and age, but there was a time when we were saying free speech extends to speech we don't like. And now we are sort of starting to test those boundaries, in my opinion. I'm not a legal expert. I did not go to law school.
Those things should not be illegal.
The Nazis, like the part of what they were doing that wasn't wrong is spewing hate. It was when they got violent was when they went over the line.
Well, when you're actually physically harming someone, then you've invaded somebody's.
I get the argument like that you can rile up a crowd of people, especially with the internet, like 100 million people overnight, and get them angry with hate speech alone. And then violence might happen. But like I don't think.
But
you
it's
can attempt
still
to
on
stop
that person
the
to act on that.
My question is hate speech itself its own crime?
No. Not in the United States.
Be.
In Canada, I think it is.
But that's
$16,000 fine. Is that right?
Those are all parts
insane.
of hate crimes. Speech is regulated under hate crime law.
In Canada?
In the U.S.
Are you sure? I'm reading about hate crime.
I didn't
Public
know that.
hate speech, hate crime. They're different in the United States. Hate crime.
Because what
criminal offense against
also,
person.
I mean, the idea of hate crime is still one of those ones where it's like, is not every crime that's committed against another person done in the act of hate? Like,
yeah, how do you know what motivated the crime? Like, you need an admission from the person. How do you know they're even being honest?
A $20 one from Francisco Sanchez Jr. He says, in Great Britain, hate speech can get you prison time. Also, the great nation of Canada. If you can't say something awful, then there is no free speech. The point of free speech is to defend the speech that's abhorrent. That nobody needs to defend speech that everybody likes. That doesn't make any sense.
It's so you can walk into a bar, tell someone to their face that you can't stand them. You guys scream at each other, and then it's over. As soon as if there's no hate speech allowed, you can't walk in. It's just going to resort to people punching each other in silent or in the shade. Like you need people to be able to get it out in vocally and have that you're not going to get attacked. You're allowed to say this to someone. You're not going to get attacked.
Yeah.
So we protect people's ability to spew hate at each other.
I mean, I always see this like look.
I don't know what this has to do with Silver Silverman. It's just my thoughts on the topic.
We've moved from first we were
hate
talking
speech and comedy. They're kind of
first we're talking art, and then that's the argument that they use to censor the art. They're saying that if the definition of hate speech is malleable, then the definition of hate speech as it relates to comedy can be malleable, and some douchebag over at MSNBC can tell you what you're allowed to say based on what he defines as hateful content.
You know, inciting violence is illegal.
Yeah.
And that is not the difference of hate speech and inciting violence are not the same thing. You can speak hatefully and not incite violence. You can incite violence without speaking hatefully. Although you could maybe argue that inciting violence is a form of hate.
But even for me, it's like, it's one of those things where like, I take the approach that when somebody says something awful to me, like I can't control what that dude said, but I can absolutely control how I respond to that. And I think that admitting that we're in a society now that doesn't even want to give people the opportunity to be enough of an adult to take responsibility for their own actions, meaning how they respond to other people's behavior towards them, that's a problem. That means we're infantilizing society. You cannot always control what happens when somebody physically attacks you or tries to harm you physically. That's obviously a crime. But to say that we no longer trust people to be able to handle the criticism of others just feels like we're surrendering our... We're basically, it's a tacit admission that we're like infantilizing our entire populace.
You remind people you don't have a right to be comfortable. You don't have a right to feel good. You don't have a right to be safe. Those aren't rights. You need to create those situations for yourself.
There's a $20 one here from Derp State Surveillance. Maybe what you interpret as hate speech was said from a place of love. Example, I love making people gasp or look uncomfortable at controversial humor. There is a huge difference between saying and doing a horrible thing. Yeah, context matters too. Like, what about somebody who gets told something uncomfortably true about themselves? Like, hey, Bam Margera, you're a drug addict. You need to go get help because you're acting like a piece of shit and you're not going to be able to see your kid unless you do something about it.
Yeah.
Is that hate speech?
No, because hate speech is specific speech that is like hateful towards classes of people. So you're singling out Bam Margera as someone who is struggling. people might say it's libelous depending on who you are and what platform you
Yeah.
expel this thought in. But like hate speech is something directed towards a class. Of
Like
people.
fat people. Like,
I
hey,
don't
Bam
know.
Margera, lose some
I don't
weight.
know if they're a protected class, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like
But that's the
protected classes
slippery
tend
slope.
to be racial, religious, gender, or sexuality.
That's
And
the
that-
road that
and
we
that
got to
will-
watch out for. Short people, fat people. Like, I can see that road heading towards you're not allowed to insult someone about their weight.
It was actually funny because it was like my dad, like when we first started hearing about the introduction of like protected classes, like when Obama came into office, my dad said bad. Like he's like, this is going to lead to a weird caste system where certain people are going to be allowed to be criticized and
That's
other
what Sarah
people.
Silverman's arguing. A point at Brett's Monitor.
Yeah.
She is saying you can make fun of yourself if you are part of that group. So a fat person can make fun of fat people, but Sarah Silverman cannot comment on fat people because she is not fat.
Unless she identifies as fat or gets fat. Maybe
I
she can
don't
get
know.
fat to make fun of fat people.
Dude, that would be a great thing where a guy, okay, I want somebody to make a movie where it's literally a guy, all he can come up with are fat jokes, but because he's skinny, he's not allowed to make those jokes. He works to get fat to make the jokes at a comedy show. And that
Or he just
becomes,
wears a fat suit and then one day gets found out.
It could be Black Mirror, man. That
Yeah.
could be, and it would take place in Britain.
Weird Al, when he would perform Fat, it's his version of Bad by Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
He would do it in a fat suit. I don't know if he still does it in a fat suit, but
Yes.
he was up until a couple of years ago because Weird Al is, he's untouchable. Everyone loves Weird Al.
Yeah.
Like nobody, everyone but Coolio loved Weird Al. So, look, it's that slippery slope. I don't like the tone in which they're like, maybe man, but perhaps like their tone is just so elitist and annoying. It makes me hate these newspapers even more because they're
You're talking about the MSNBC article?
yeah. It's like maybe man. But she says, besides, there are so many other things to mock other than marginalized people. Things like bad breath, which Sarah Silverman croons about. That's not funny. And I'm saying that, so I don't think it's funny. So what if somebody else wants to make another joke? They're not, now they have to check with you? Kick rocks.
Okay, well, here's my other example. So she's saying don't make fun of marginalized people. But what if you are a person who, so in America, that would be like racial minorities, right? And obviously you shouldn't be mean to people about anything they can't control or anything like that. But what if you are from another country where your ethnicity is the dominant ethnicity?
Yeah.
So you're a comedian who developed there and then you come to America and you're going to perform. Would you have to change your rules to then fit our society's standard of comedy?
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Like,
Also, they're
it
kind of
creates an
interpreting.
impossible standard because you're trying to regulate something in this one scope that's actually very limited.
Yeah, and it sets up a situation where in 20 years, the comedy from 20 years ago might be considered racist now.
I mean, we're
or-
already seeing that. Who was it who said we couldn't make The Office in today's day and age?
Yeah, Mindy Kaling said we wouldn't be able to make The Office today. You see that
Well,
they're
her
making.
career is failing, so
Did
I
you see that
understand why.
they're making a female-led version of The Office?
I don't understand. We already had Jan. I don't understand.
It's an Australian version.
Also, if you have ever worked in a female-led or all-female office, let me tell you, no thank you.
Yeah.
I said that about Mindy Kaling out of anger, and I'm on TV, so I should be respectful and responsible. I don't know if her career is failing, but Scooby-Doo looked horrible. And I heard it was absolutely terrible.
It was horrible, and it was extremely mean-spirited. In fact, actually, you know what? That reminds me of something. There's a difference between tone, right? So the reason people hated Velma is because it was extremely mean-spirited. What they're saying here is that you're not even smart enough to be able to denote the tone of the comedy you're watching. So there is a difference between mean-spirited comedy, comedy that's just observational, and comedy that's done in jest. And tone matters in your ability to discern the tone. Unfortunately, that's on you. That's on you, the person watching it, because when you enter into a relationship with a comedian, all he can do is present you the art. It's up to you to interpret the art in the way that you want to, and he has to kind of relinquish control of that and say, look, I'm going to make this joke, and it's up to you to decide how you take it. In a lot of ways. One of the problems with a lot of the art we're seeing these days is that a lot of these actors, they make a movie and then they rush to tell you what that was about, what they meant by that, rather than just letting the art exist and letting you interpret it for whatever you want it to be. And that's a problem because they're infantilizing you, me, everyone else who becomes the audience for that.
Kind of a reverse of making a YouTube video and then going and reading the comments right away afterwards. Like, why do you care what the interpretation of your art was?
Yeah.
Why not just let the art breathe on its own?
Yeah. I mean, I have that issue here, like where people will watch stuff we make and they have their opinions of whatever we're talking about. And you just have to kind of say like, look, you're allowed to have your opinions on whatever it is you think. And that's fine. Like, I have no right to tell you what to think about it. All I can do is share my opinions with you, and whatever conclusion you interpret from that, that's your business. It's not my business. Thanks for watching. Listen to full episodes of Pop Culture Crisis on Spotify.
Keep up with us on social media and make sure you subscribe and ring that bell so you never miss the show. Bye, guys.